is the party that effectively kidnapped a tennis player a while back, and you often wonder what the Chinese people think of this kind of behaviour from their government. But of course, they never get asked, and we'll never know because they've got bigger problems. Like Xi Jinping, I think it was last week, was redirecting floodwater into villages to protect Beijing. So it's not like the regime gives the people an opportunity from their suffering to come and criticise the goings-on of princelings. But if his disappearance was political, which it almost certainly was, do you see more of these disappearances happening in the future? Because Xi Jinping is actually in quite a bit of trouble, particularly after the way that COVID was happened, and a lot of the powerful businessmen, particularly in Beijing, are very unhappy with him.
Well, the Chinese economy is in real trouble. Despite, some boosters in the West saying that China still represents the nirvana, that's not the reality. It's got huge debt. It's got this property bubble, which is unbelievable, which could burst at any time. And the only reason it doesn't burst is that debt keeps getting shifted to provincial authorities or municipal authorities and the like. They've got deflation at the present time, and they've just got a very difficult economy, let alone all the other problems such as flooding, et cetera, et cetera. So Xi Jinping has got some real challenges on his hands, but because he's such an ideologue who prefers to continue to advance what he sees as the ideological pathway of China rather than dealing with the economic issues, these two things are in tension, and many observers think that the economic problems are unlikely to be solved because they're not going about it in a way which allows enterprise to flourish in China. This is quite contrary to the former leader Deng Xiaoping's opening up of China, which Xi Jinping is just closing down China all the time. And so this is not a nirvana anymore. It's a real problematic state.
Well, anyone who has read The Rise of Xi Jinping would have no illusions about what kind of man he is, what kind of leadership he runs, and what fate may befall him, because the real question is, could the world wake up one day and find that Xi Jinping, the supreme princeling, has vanished?
Well, anything can happen in China, that's for sure. There have been rumours in the past of coup attempts against him and even rumours of assassination attempts against him. Whether there's any substance to those rumours, we don't really know because, as I said, it's such an opaque system. One thing we do know, though, is that Xi Jinping, having worked his way to the power which he holds at the present time, is not going to let it go readily. And so you see him carrying out the removal of people, for example, their space agency, the leading general in charge of that space agency, and others have been removed from it recently. The charges are always usually corruption or some breach of national security, but often they're a cover for other political activities within China itself.
Yeah, well, if we just speculate just before you go here, I'm interested to hear your opinion. China is under quite an iron fist here with Xi Jinping, but there are growing interest for some of the powerful people in China to embrace more of the West, and certainly the Western business, because they don't want to be controlled by the state. They want to be allowed to explore and expand their ideas and their enterprises themselves without this restrictive government, because Xi Jinping has actually brought in a whole stack of extra state interference that a lot of people don't realise, where it's become harder for a company to operate now in China than it ever was for the last 20 or 30 years. Do you think that there could be, if there was a leadership change toward a more Western style approach, or is China going to reinforce its hardcore communist ideals after Xi Jinping?
Look, I don't think it's going to walk away from its, ideological communist commitment. All members of the leading members of the CCP subscribe to that. But the question is whether or not they relax some of the restrictions at the moment on economic performance, trade with the West, etc. That's what Deng was trying to do. It's what Xi Jinping has reversed. Leading businessmen have either disappeared or being silenced. Look at Jack Ma. He's a great, example of that, of someone who was, brought to heel in China, and that's the way in which Xi will continue to operate. I think the real test here is what happens to the economy overall. But the kind of unofficial social contract in China has been that we can have these very restrictive practices, we can continue this ideological crusade, provided the ordinary Chinese people have an improving economic situation for themselves. If the economic downturn in China continues apace and starts to really affect ordinary Chinese, well, that's the time when I think Xi is in most danger in terms of his leadership into the future.
Oh, you're so right. I mean, while ever the children of China are brought up in a state of worship of Xi Jinping, which is what they have to do in their schools, I don't see there's going to be any generations coming up underneath that can value anything other than what they've been taught and indoctrinated with. And there's a danger that we're doing the same thing to our kids over here with the way we are teaching ideology rather than the old Western values of investigation and free thought. But look, it's been exceptionally insightful, and thank you so much for coming and joining us today.